Let's talk about creamed spinach. It's an incredibly easy recipe. It's really delicious. It goes well with just about anything. I like pairing it with salmon, chicken, steaks. It's awesome. You're going to need to start with 3/4 cup water. We're going to put in 2 to 4 tablespoons of butter, about 1 cup of heavy cream, so about half of this container. You're going to want some white wine vinegar. I keep mine in a little spray bottle like this, and about 8 ounces of frozen spinach, which I still have sitting in the freezer. I'll take that out in just a moment. That's it. That's the whole thing. You might want a little bit of salt to go on there as well, but that's it. It's a really simple recipe. It's going to come together in just a few minutes. All we're going to do at the very beginning is going to throw in 3/4 cup water into a pan, turn it up to high heat just until it begins to boil. So while that's coming up to a boil, I'm going to run to the freezer and grab my frozen spinach. You want chopped frozen spinach. Like this. That's upside down. That's right. There we go. Frozen spinach. If it's in big chunks, you actually want to break it a little bit. Just throw it on the countertop. Smash it a few times, and then you've got your spinach in the right shape for doing the recipe. This is a 16-ounce bag, 1 pound. I'm going to use about half of it. Just cut a hole in the end, hold on to half the bag, and then pour the other half out, and you'll hold it in place without using too much. You can see how quickly this is already coming up to a boil. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to just give it a few more seconds. Yeah, okay, that's good. I'm going to put in half my bag, so about 8 ounces of spinach. There we go. Throw that back in the freezer in a sec. Even this out. And then all you want to do is bring this back up to a boil. And as soon as it's back up to a boil, which is happening very quickly on this stove, it might take you a minute or so. This is a very high power burner. As soon as that's back up to a boil, you want to drop the heat to medium and then throw a lid on top of your pan. So I'm just using this universal lid here. Throw a lid on top. Doesn't need to be a perfect fit, and then set yourself a 6-minute timer. When that timer's done, we're going to take the lid off. If there's an excessive amount of moisture left, we will drain that water really quickly. We don't need to be persnickety about it. We can just kind of tilt your pan into the sink and get rid of extra water. And then at that point, we're going to start adding our butter and some of our white wine vinegar. This is enough for 2 pretty healthy servings. I usually serve them in a nice big 1-cup ramekin like this, and I get 2 pretty healthy servings out of this. If you need to feed more folks, just be able to scale up the recipe. The timings should be about the same. As long as your water comes up to a boil again, you're good. So the spinach is almost done here. I can even hear it. I can hear how it's boiling off. Our goal here is that we're trying to boil off a good amount of the water that's in the spinach, but have enough water in the pan so the spinach doesn't basically burn and stick to your pan. So if there is excess water when we're done with this step, we will just drain it off. Usually the measurements here, half a bag of spinach, so 8 ounces of spinach plus 3/4 cup water is about perfect. There we go. Okay, 6-minute timer is complete. I'm gonna pop this lid off. Let's see how we're doing for moisture. There's a little bit. It's not too crazy. I might drain this a tiny bit. So right now is when we're going to add our butter. So you can go anywhere from 2 to 4 tablespoons. Now I like butter. Butter adds a ton of flavor. So I'm going to strongly suggest you go the 4 tablespoon route. We're going to let this butter melt for just a little bit before we add our next ingredient, which will be the white wine vinegar. Squeeze bottles like this are your best friend in the kitchen because you can load them up with whatever. You make your own quick sauce when you're making steaks or something, or tacos. You load it into one of these bottles, squeeze it on top. Everything looks fancier as soon as you do that. They're dirt cheap too. You get a pack of 6 of these for, I don't know, $6 to $8. The reason we add the vinegar, a little bit for brightness, a little bit for flavor. The other added benefit though is the vinegar helps the fats in this dish emulsify and be evenly suspended. So without the vinegar, you might have some of your fats, what's called breaking on you and separate in your final product. But with the vinegar, it helps these fats to suspend themselves in all the rest of the liquid so we get a smoother texture when we're done. Okay, so butter's melted. We've got some vinegar in there already. Now is when we add our heavy cream. We want about a cup of this, so 1 cup for every 8 ounces of spinach. So if you're doubling this up, because this is a good amount for serving 2 people. If you want to serve more than that, double it up if you want 4 people. 1 cup of heavy cream to 8 ounces of spinach. Now you can just eyeball it. That feels like it's about half of the carton. That's about as precise as you need to be. It's like, yeah, it's about half. Stir that up a little bit. Make sure your heat is on medium to medium low at this point. And we want to cook this down until when we draw our spatula through the center, we actually see a clear trail that slowly fills back in. Right now, I draw it through the center and the cream flows right back into that center. Just make sure you keep moving things fairly frequently because it is possible, especially if your burners are a little uneven with how they distribute heat. It's possible for you to have a hot spot and your spinach to start sticking there and your cream to burn a little bit. It's hard because there's a good amount of moisture, but keep it moving. Better end product. And we're just cooking off the moisture at this point, allowing some of the flavors to burn off. And in this recipe, I haven't added any salt or pepper yet. We will. In this recipe, though, this is a great recipe both for learning this technique and for practicing it, and it's tasting as you cook. So for here, I like to grab a nice big spoon, which I'm in the middle of moving, so I have a very big spoon. And what you want to do as you're cooking is actually taste the food to figure out how you need to season it further. And in this recipe, there actually is some salt coming from your heavy cream, sort of a little bit, not too much, but you don't need much. And what will often happen is you'll taste it and you think you need more salt in this recipe. But then as soon as it comes off the stove and it's cooled a little bit, it'll taste even saltier than it did before. For this recipe, err on the side of under-salting rather than over-salting, and you'll probably get a better end product. Or rather, you will get a better end product. So you can already see there's the slightest delay in that cream coming back to the center now. And so this is just thickening. You see this in all sorts of recipes where they say reduce or thicken until it coats the back of a spoon. Like there's some recipes where you can do that. Well, they'll say, stir it up until it coats the back of a spoon so that you can swipe your finger through it and it'll leave a line. I don't always like giving that advice because there's times where someone's cooking something that can be kind of sticky. And if they swipe their finger through it, that thing's going to stick to their finger. And if it's ridiculously hot, which it probably is, you'll actually get a really bad burn on your finger because burning yourself with something sticky is significantly worse than something that's just hot water. This hot water will hit your skin and come off and it's done. Something sticky will hit your skin and it'll stick there and it will keep imparting heat continuously. Now it's a good time to add some salt. I'm using my fleur cell here because this is a wet food, so using a wet salt works very well. I'm actually going to taste it right now, even with it being pretty liquidy, so that I can get an idea of how much further it might need to go for some of the flavors and if it needs more acid, because I don't necessarily want to wait to the end to add more acid. If I add more acid, I do want it to cook off a little bit. So just make sure you blow on your spoon so it cools off a bit. So that's good. It does need more salt. It needs a little more acid. A little more of that acid gives it some brightness, some vibrance. I could tell it needed more acid because it didn't taste very bright. It tasted kind of heavy due to all the cream and the butter. You taste it, and if it tastes like something is missing, if you ever eat something, you're like, there's something missing here. It usually means there's acid missing. And a little bit of lemon juice or white wine vinegar or even balsamic vinegar will make that food pop all of a sudden. When I make salad, sometimes I like to throw in some dandelion greens, but dandelion greens are incredibly bitter. So I will usually pair it with a little bit of a good thick balsamic vinegar. And the little bit of sweetness from that balsamic and the little bit of bitterness from those dandelion greens actually go incredibly well together. So you can see when I swipe, it takes a lot longer to fill in now than before. We're almost there. I want it a little bit thicker. So you can see it's taking a little while to fill in. Even right at the edge here, it's taking its time to get back in there. But we want that to take just a little bit longer. And you want to keep in mind that anytime you're thickening something, when it's still on the heat, it's going to look runnier than it will be when you take it off. And at this point, you could take it off and you could call it done if you want something that's a little bit runnier, a little bit softer for the texture. If you want something that's a little bit thicker, it holds onto the spoon a little bit better, you just go a little bit longer. Time to test your flavors again. And this is just a great skill to use anytime you're cooking, because you never really quite know what's in some of your food inherently. And so if you get better at practicing tasting your food as you're cooking, you'll be able to start responding to those differences in natural food flavors with how you season. Yeah, I think that's about right. You could add other seasonings to this as well. Sometimes it's nice to add a little bit of garlic powder. You could add cumin or even some paprika and just really play around with it, because what you've got here are some very basic, subtle flavors that pair well with most other things. This is great with chicken. This is great with steak. This is great with salmon, which is how I typically eat this. I'll cook some of this up as I'm searing some salmon and eat those together, and it's absolutely delicious. It's taking multiple seconds to fill back in. I'm actually going to call this done right here. Just turn the heat off. So then just load up your ramekins. And these are going to thicken up a little bit while they're in there. And the color of your final mixture will actually have, it's almost like the cream has a little bit of a yellowness to it, partially because we cooked it with the spinach. Those are totally normal colors, nothing to be concerned about. This is your cream spinach. It pairs well with just about anything. It is absolutely delicious.